So this is Ed Stetzer Live, and this and every Saturday at this time, or whenever you listen to this via podcast. They keep telling me to mention the podcast because I think so many people listen via podcast now because, Saturday morning or early afternoon, you may not have a consistent schedule, but with the podcast, you can listen anytime. But again, this is Ed Stetzer Live. You go to edstetzerlive.com, subscribe to the podcast there. But my name is Ed Stetzer, obviously. I'm the Dean of the Talbot School of Theology at Biola University, though it might sound today, after our conversation, that I'm the Dean of the Film School at Biola University, which I'm not. That's a guy by the name of Tom Helene. But we have our guest today who's actually, been working in the world of Hollywood, but also has this fascinating play of a topic I'm particularly interested in. As a matter of fact, next week at this time, a little after this time, I'll be on my way to Oxford, where I teach at Wycliffe Hall twice a year, and I'll be going to C.S. Lewis's house called the Kilns, and I'll be sitting in a pub that Lewis and Tolkien used to sit in, but not the one. I'll explain all that a little bit today on the program. Dean Batali is an experienced head writer for popular TV shows with over 20 years experience in the industry. He's a regular speaker and teacher at film festivals, media conferences, and in college classrooms. Dean started out writing musicals at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, wrote and performed for Taproot Theater in Seattle. His recent works include one-man plays, Charles Dickens, speaking of Scrooge, George Washington, A General's Prayer. And Dean also co-wrote the book Watching TV Religiously, which examines television from a spiritual perspective. What we're going to talk about today, I've got lots of things I want to talk about because I'm fascinated by someone who's kind of trying to be a faithful presence in Hollywood. But he has a play out called Lewis and Tolkien, and it's at Museum of the Bible. We love Museum of the Bible here as well. And the description says, step into the rabbit room of the famed Eagle and Child pub, which we're going to explain all of that as we go through the show. And Dean, as you know, the Eagle and Child is currently closed and under renovation. Larry Ellison recently bought it, and it closed during COVID. So when we go to Oxford, I'm taking a group of students there next week. We actually go across the street because Lewis and Tolkien and the Inklings, who would go to the Rabbit Room and go to the Eagle and Child, eventually they got too crowded, and they said, well, let's go across the street. So it's not as awesome as going to the Eagle and Child, but it's the best we can do. Welcome to the program, Dean. We appreciate you coming on.
It's good to be with you, and it sounds like you know a lot of stuff about C.S. Lewis, so I'm already a little bit intimidated. So I'm going to act like
I'm not a Lewis scholar. I'm not a Lewis scholar by any stretch of the imagination, but I teach, Wycliffe Hall is the Anglican, it's an Anglican theological college there, and I teach there, since for decades the Queen required all the Anglican schools to offer an evangelism workshop, and so I go over there and I bring my Talbot students, so it's a joint Wycliffe Hall, Oxford / Talbot class, and we go to C.S. Lewis's house, which is called the Kilns, as you know, and then I wish we could go to the Eagle and Child, but we stand in front of it looking sad. It is. It looks like it got and it's got a great plan, and Ellison has, $1 billion, so you think I'd like to figure out if he has a religious interest in this. I've Googled it, and I don't know either, because he doesn't seem to have that, but, why do you buy the Eagle and Child? I guess it's historic, and you can love Lewis and Tolkien and not be a person of faith.
He might be a Tolkien nerd and just want it for his collection of things that Tolkien nerds collect, I guess. But by the way,
when you're a billionaire, you can.
Right. By the way, it was 62 years ago today that C.S. Lewis died. On November 22nd.
Look at that.
1963. Yeah.
Thank you for reminding me of that.
I didn't realize that till I woke up today. And as you probably know, he died on the same day as John F. Kennedy and Aldous Huxley.
That's right.
Which is a fascinating triplet. There's a great book that a scholar named Peter Kreeft wrote called Between Heaven and Hell, which imagines a dialogue between Kennedy, Lewis, and Huxley, kind of in purgatory and kind of after their death. Anyway, but today's the day. So this worked out perfectly.
You already surprised me by quoting Peter. So, you are not the normal Hollywood if you're reading Peter's work. But I'm so glad. And by the way, just so everyone knows, we have not met before. Dean and I have not met before, but we live in the same area in Southern California. And so I want to talk some about the play, but I want to kind of start with a little bit of your own journey. You've got this book you were part of, read Hollywood religiously and more. Yeah. But tell me what it's like to work in Hollywood as a believer.
Yeah, so I actually came to Hollywood about 35 years ago, and I came here right after getting fired from a Christian theater company, which is for another interview. I had been a casual churchgoer growing up. Then, when I was 18 years old, had a kind of Saul on the way to Damascus religious experience, like darkness to light. Immediately got involved with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship at the Evergreen State College, which at the time the school was 2,500 people, and the Christian Fellowship was 4 people. So even then, I was kind of the odd man out in classes. I really had a desire to do theater for the Christian audience. We can talk more about that, how that's led to Lewis and Tolkien 35 years later. But I started writing musicals for the church, kind of biblical musicals and other kind of things. But they were done for a general audience, but they were obviously going to be really appreciated by the church. For my senior thesis, I wrote a musical. And again, this is the Evergreen State College, just a liberal arts college in Olympia, Washington. But I looked at Hollywood and wondered why I wasn't seeing Christian characters on television, specifically why Christians just seem to be kind of absent. And this is even before shows like Touch by an Angel and Seventh Heaven, let alone where the landscape is today, which is a complicated landscape of Christian characters on television. And so I just kind of wondered, maybe I can use the skills that I've developed as a playwright, as a musical writer, comedy writer, and go to Hollywood and see if I can have any success doing the job. I've had a very successful career on television. I've worked on shows like That 70s Show for 7 years. I worked on the first 2 seasons of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I worked on a Hallmark show called Good Witch, and already I'm sure people are going, what in the world is Christian doing on a show like that?
Here come the calls. I'm going to give the phone number in just a minute. Let's get it going. Go ahead, keep going.
Yeah. And we'll talk about that. But I felt at the time we just weren't being represented. And I got here and found a growing and thriving Christian community that had already started. I mean, there was a group of 7 people, I think, that got together at Warner Brothers in the late 80s and started praying for more Christians to come to Hollywood. And I feel like I was influenced by those prayers. And obviously they should have been more specific because they ended up with me. But those kinds of things were happening. And I have been then tried to be this faithful presence on shows that have not always been godly. I have not had much success getting Christian characters on. The Parents Television Council used to name That 70s Show as one of the worst 3 shows on television in terms of sexual content and morality. And my argument to them is, well, if I hadn't been there, we would have been number 1. Because that's what one Christian's presence on a show can do in terms of trying to affect the content. Television is made very in community, contributing to various things. There's a head writer, and I was just one of the writers on 70 Show for years and years. But I tried to make the show a little less than what it would have been without me. And that's been my journey here in Hollywood. And I continue to try to pitch shows about Christian characters. Haven't gotten them on yet. When I ran a show like Good Witch for Hallmark, which wasn't really about a witch, but I just tried to make it a show that was more about love, joy, peace, patience, and kindness, and goodness, and faithfulness, and self-control. It's been a complicated life. When I look at my credits, when Christians look at my credits, they do, well, how come you couldn't have been on better shows or more moral shows? And I guess the response is, well, God didn't need me there. And the interesting thing about the Christian community in Hollywood now, when I got here, I could count the number of Christian TV writers I knew on one hand. And now I have a list of 55 Christian writers who are in the Writers Guild and have worked on television shows within the last 5 years. And it's a growing community here. And we struggle and we live in community and we work together and we talk about these things a lot. And we talk about culture a lot. And we talk about our influence and our responsibilities and what things we should and shouldn't work on, and try to make our way through this system, which has, I'm not going to say Hollywood was abandoned by Christians, but it's been avoided by Christians. So of course, we're not going to be represented here very well. And we're trying to change that over the long haul. Did I say I've been here 35 years? So
fascinating. Well, the idea of faithful presence, just so those might not be aware, is kind of an idea that Christians often talk about. James Davison Hunter wrote a book to change the world and talked about how Christians being in these settings makes a difference. And you mentioned, Christian characters in Hollywood. I remember probably the first time I noticed an overtly Christian character was L.A. Law, not exactly a bastion of Christian content, but Jane Halliday was a character played by Alexandra Powers, and she was a Bob Jones University graduate, and clearly the producers they actually said, this made LA Times and everything else in 1993, and they said they wanted to portray her realistically, not as a stereotype, because most of the time Christians are portrayed as a stereotype. And you don't see a lot of characters. Maybe I think of the Methodist pastor in The Americans, who's portrayed in a more positive way. That's right. But there's not a lot of what we might call mainstream television and more. And you even said that you weren't particularly successful at making that happen. So, I mean, tell me a little bit, and then I'm going to open up for the calls too, but tell me a little bit, like, how did you some of the content, like, I didn't watch that 70s show. I'm aware of it. It was a very famous show. But like there's some content in there that you said, the Parents Television Council, and I think other people will say, how do you navigate these things as well? So talk to us a little bit about, then we'll open up for some calls and have some conversation.
Yeah, and it is a fair argument to say that this idea that Christians are going to go to places where bad is being done and try to make the bad less bad is a kind of new and controversial thing. And I'm not saying that everything in Hollywood is bad. I don't think Hollywood is Sodom and Gomorrah. I think Hollywood is Nineveh and is on the road to redemption. And the people in Hollywood, God loves the people in Hollywood as much as he loves anyone else. And he certainly has a heart for artists. The first thing God did was create, and the first job that Adam had was to be a writer by naming the animals. So I think that we can track that, and we in Hollywood think about that a lot. But there's been kind of this missing. So I have worked on. You can turn down jobs in Hollywood, and I have turned down jobs in Hollywood. But the idea of going to the places where can we make these shows? That 70s show was about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Buffy the Vampire Slayer was about a woman who kills demons by stabbing them and kicking them. And that's not how we defeat the demonic, in my opinion. And I tried to turn those stories into things that were just a little bit different. I tried to stress kindness and goodness on that 70s show. I tried to tell stories about friendship and faithfulness. I tried to show an intact family. And in fact, it was a family that happened to go to church. So we had some interesting episodes where they were in a church and talking about God. Now, they were high at the time, so some people might look at that as being sacrilegious, but I was just trying to get God onto the playing field and promote good values on a show like that. It's hard. It's draining. I came home many nights frustrated by what I couldn't do. I talked to other writers who are on other shows where they can represent characters of faith or qualities of faith differently than I was able to on television, which is why, getting back to theater, and we'll get more into that later, there's a little more freedom now to write the characters that I want to do, because Hollywood hasn't been fully embracing of the kinds of ideas that I'd like to write. By the way, there's other Christian characters on TV right now on a show called When Calls the Heart, which is on Hallmark. There was a show called Rectify, which was on the Sundance Channel years ago. Even a show called Beef, where they took a journey into the Korean American evangelical church and really got it right, because the head writer's brother happens to be a worship leader. So they're kind of popping up. And there was a show called God Friended Me a couple years ago. The House of David now is on Amazon. The Chosen, of course. So there are more nowadays, but I just kind of want to see us represented as much as we are in the world on every show, and what that would look like in the culture of Hollywood that hasn't really, whether or not Hollywood is hostile to faith or not is a separate conversation, but most people in Hollywood have just kind of declared Jesus irrelevant. And I feel that we as Christian writers and Christians in Hollywood need to get into those rooms where these conversations are being had and make our case for why Jesus is relevant.
Fascinating. Okay, we're going to continue our conversation with Dean Batali in just a minute. Our phone number, maybe you got questions about this, is 877-548-3675. Again, that's 877-548-3675. The play, Lewis and Tolkien, is actually right now at the Museum of the Bible, and just for a few more days. So I want to encourage you to get there as well. And we're going to continue our conversation with Dean and your calls in just a moment. Okay, we're back with Dean Vitale, and we're continuing our conversation about Hollywood in some measure, but also we're going to talk about his new play, Lewis and Tolkien. It's at the Museum of the Bible right now, and I know it's been going on for a little bit already. Dean, tell us, what's it like to have a play that is actually at a museum? I mean, I'm just fascinated by, what's going on here. So explain a little bit what this is.
Yeah, so I actually wrote this play about 3 years ago, and it's since been performed in Los Angeles and in Seattle and in Calgary, Canada, and now currently in Washington, D.C. We're actually working on getting it to some other cities that we hope that this play has a life. I had been thinking about writing a play about Lewis and Tolkien ever since I read a book called The Most Reluctant Convert and learned about what Addison's Walk is and what happened at Addison's Walk when Lewis and Tolkien were both in their 30s. And it had to do with it's when Lewis essentially became a Christian. He actually they had a conversation. Addison's Walk is a pathway at Magdalen College, which I've never been to. It sounds like you might have been to since you're in Oxford a lot.
I go twice a year. So
yeah. So they had a conversation with another Inkling named Hugo Dyson, and the Inklings were the group that Lewis and Tolkien were a part of, kind of a writers group of professors and Christians who hung out at the Eagle and Child in Oxford. But they were talking that night about myth and story and truth and the eucatastrophe, the sudden turn in life. And Lewis had become a theist, but had not reasoned his way back to Christianity. And I just thought it would be fascinating to have a play of these three guys talking about story. They were talking about Owen Barfield's book. This gets really into the weeds, but Owen Barfield was another Inkling who wrote about language and words and story. And it was the night that that Tolkien said, "Well, I like that." Lewis said, "I like the idea of Jesus, but it's just a myth, and myths are lies, albeit lies breathed through silver." And Tolkien said, "Yeah, but just because a story has happened before doesn't negate the fact that it could one day happen in real life, because Jesus is the true myth. Jesus is the story that God has prepared for us. And yes, there's been other stories of people who sacrificed their life, but actually legend and history muse. God is the Lord of angels and of elves, and mankind. And that's who Jesus is. That's the truth of who Jesus is." And then a couple of weeks later, Lewis, on the way to the zoo, sitting in the sidecar of his brother's motorcycle, actually said, "When I left for the zoo, I was not a Christian. When I got there, I was." And that conversation, he wrote later in a letter, the conversation I had with Tolkien and Dyson was a big part of that. So I thought about it'd be wonderful to talk about these characters, these people, true life people, when they were younger. A producer approached me and asked me to do a story about them when they were older. I used that story of Addison's Walk in the play. It's about a 7 or 10 minute portion of the play. And I jumped at the chance to show Christian characters on stage representing ourselves. As much as I like being present in Hollywood, I can also make the case that nearly every subcultural group in America has first represented themselves in theater. August Wilson wrote 10 plays about the African-American experience, one for each decade in the 20th century. Tony Kushner wrote Angels in America, kind of changed the understanding of homosexuality in America. Eve Ensler with the Vagina Monologues, Wendy Wasserstein writing from a feminist perspective. Christians haven't done so in the theater. And those theater writers eventually often get movies made of their work or go into Hollywood. So I wrote this. So I came to realize, and I already knew this because I'd read a lot about Lewis and Tolkien. I'm not an expert on either of them, but I had read enough to know that they were very close at one point and then were not eventually. And a lot of it had to do with Lewis's marriage to Joy Davidman. Tolkien, as a staunch Catholic, just felt you can't marry a divorced woman. That's against the rules of the Bible. And it kind of broke up their friendship. They also were living in different places. But after Lewis died, Tolkien wrote to a friend, "The reality is, for the last 10 years, Mr. Lewis and I haven't actually been very close. His marriage to Mrs. Davidman had something to do with that. He still couldn't call her Mrs. Lewis." And so I put these two guys in a room, an imagined meeting in the fall of 1963, where they show up and they're not getting along. And there's a barmaid named Veronica who sort of helps them to work through their differences. And it's just 90 minutes of these two guys sitting in the Eagle and Child, drinking beer, fighting, laughing, reminiscing. And it's kind of a, can this marriage be saved? Because there's still some controversy about whether or not their relationship ever was revived. It does seem true that Tolkien went to Lewis's house a couple of times in the last months of his life. But this play imagines what they might have talked about as they reminisce about the creation of their work. Tolkien talks about writing The Hobbit, and the only reason he wrote The Hobbit is because he was grading papers and there was a blank page. So he didn't have to read anything to grade it, and he wrote on it. He doesn't even know why he wrote on it. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. And I posit in this play that if it hadn't been for that blank page, The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings might have never existed. Lewis talks about creating Chronicles of Narnia when he had children staying with him at the kilns that you talked about earlier. And then they see if they can reconcile the differences. And it's a lot of pain. It shows what it takes. I didn't realize when I wrote it how much I was writing about male friendship. It shows these two guys in their 60s really working hard to be honest. Lewis talks about the death of his wife. Lewis talks about, how grief feels so much like fear. Lewis talks about how he felt rejected, that Tolkien wouldn't even come near after Joy's death because of the brokenness of their relationship. Talks about friendship, talks about working through our differences, setting aside dogma so that we can get back to being friends. And then it kind of leaves things hanging at the end as to what their relationship might have been if they had been able to reconcile after all these years. So it's put these two guys on stage, and people have said it just feels like they're a fly in the wall. I've been fascinated by the response to it. And it's been really satisfying. All these performances that we've had over the years, most of the runs have been extended with a lot of sold out performances. People have really responded to this in a way, thinking I'm a Tolkien and Lewis expert when I'm really not. But I found enough, mostly from their letters. There's some great collections of their letters, both Lewis and Tolkien, that I got their voices. And there they are, two Christian characters on stage. And I actually walked through the conversation at Addison's Walk that led to Lewis saying, thy will be done. So it's really fun to watch that in a theater. And by the way, we didn't do it. Two of the theaters has been performed that haven't been in any way associated with Christian theaters. It's a mainstream kind of show that the audience is going to like it. Christian audiences are going to like it if they know Lewis and Tolkien. We've had a lot of Tolkien fans come up, didn't even know Tolkien was friends with Lewis. So they're just kind of experiencing the gospel truth in this play, which is not my intent necessarily to be evangelistic, but it's just what happens when I have these characters on stage talking about faith.
Well, I love that you've done it. I'm fascinated by it. I love the theme. Of course, I love Lewis and Tolkien. So
Yeah.
super. I used to be at Wheaton College, and of course the Billy Graham Center and the Wade Center there. So we had the actual wardrobe there at Wheaton College, and And so I'm a bit of a C.S. Lewis, more so Lewis than Tolkien. I'm not mad at Tolkien. I'm just more of a Lewis fan. But just great stuff. And again, our phone number. You want to talk about C.S. Lewis, Tolkien? You want to talk about kind of navigating Hollywood and more? With Dean Batali here. And so our phone number is 8. I keep saying your name like 3 different ways. Say your last name publicly out loud right now.
Well, my father called us Batali, but you can call us whatever you want. Batali, like rhymes with Sally. Yeah, Batali.
Yeah,
Sally Batali. I used to make up, Batali. But it really should, I'm not sure if I go to Italy, they pronounce it this way. But that's
I know. It's like I grew up on Long Island, so I want to say Batali. Anyway, but our phone number, if you want to call in, talk to Dean, is 877-548-3675. Again, that's 877-548-3675. And you talked a little bit about, this Hollywood and sort of, trying to make a positive difference. And again, it's, for me, I mean, we have a vested interest in this at Biola University because we have a top 20 film school. We're the only Christian school in the country that is listed in like Variety magazine as a top film school. But we are, sending students to be a faithful presence in Hollywood setting. Because Hollywood, Hollywood's both a place, but it's kind of a concept as well. So like when you're working on an episode, like how did you navigate it when, you might be writing something that, man, you just disagree with this idea? How do you navigate a conflict with your faith?
Well, I just want to affirm, first of all, that it's hard. And I just want to affirm to Christians out there who kind of wonder what Christians are doing in Hollywood, that we struggle with this, that we talk about it a lot, we pray about it a lot, we converse and struggle with it a lot. I was assigned the task of writing for characters that did not have a Christian worldview. And I had to write characters doing things that I do not think God is pleased with. Now, at various times, I had more say over the matter. When I was running a show, the head writer on a show like Good Witch, I think God was asking me to affect the content in whatever way I could. When I was only a production assistant or a staff writer on a show, I didn't have as much say. So I had to do the assignment. I could have, now to be fair, I could have not taken the job, or I could have said no to the assignment. If I said no to the assignment, I would have been fired and then not asked back the next year. So we do here in Hollywood think a lot about people like Daniel. Now, Daniel was a slave. So if he had said no to what the king was saying, he would have been killed. And if I had said no, I just wouldn't have the house that I live in. So it's not a direct comparison. But we show how he, tried not to compromise and tried not to bow down to another god. And so we can talk about that after the break, because I think we kind of need to figure out, what does compromise mean? What is that line between compromise and bowing down to another god?
Love it. Our number, 877-548-3675. That's 877-548-3675. Continue our conversation in just a minute. Okay, we're back at Stetzer Live, and we're talking to Dean Batali. We're talking about his play. We're talking about his life, I guess, in a sense, his work. But his play is Lewis and Tolkien. It's at the Museum of the Bible right now. It actually has toured before and probably be touring again. And by the way, as our family's members of the Museum of the Bible, we love Museum of the Bible. I encourage you to go support that. But go to the play, take the day at the museum as well. The link is over at edstetzerlive.com. It'll link right to the Lewis and Tolkien there. You get tickets and more.
By the way, Museum of the Bible.
Yeah, please.
Museum of the Bible has an exhibit, has a Lewis exhibit that I think a lot of it was donated by the Wheaton Center, one of Lewis's typewriters and a bunch of original books. So even after the play closes, get to the Museum of the Bible and check out the C.S. Lewis exhibit there in Washington, D.C.
Yes, it is there, and I can assure you Wheaton did not donate it to the Museum of the Bible. He loaned it to the Museum of the Bible. Because it's funny, because when I do I take these, the people who live in Oxford, my students in Oxford, they don't go to the kilns because it's not, they probably did it 10 years ago, but that's C.S. Lewis's house. And when we go to C.S. Lewis's house, I take the Talbot students, and 10 days I'll be in the kilns, the C.S. Lewis's house. And they come by, and there's this wardrobe there, and everyone asks, "Is that the wardrobe?" And I don't say anything because I'm not at Wheaton College anymore. I'm at Biola University. But the tour guide always says something. No, that's at a college in America. And so I know exactly where it is. I take pictures in front of it. Everyone wants to. And they actually, after the movie came out, The Chronicles of Narnia, the people at the Wade Center, that's the name of it at Wheaton College, is the Wade Center. They actually put coats in it that match the movie. So now little kids come in there, and they sometimes to open the wardrobe and try to get in it, which of course it's much smaller than in the movie. But it's pretty funny to see the kids' reaction to the wardrobe. I love it. And I love that you love Lewis and Tolkien. I love that you've written this play. And again, this is on a limited run. This only is going till November 30th. So if you're listening live, you got about over 10 days if you're listening, or less than 10 days if you're listening to a podcast. Get there soon. I want to read a little bit of an article. You're in an article in The Atlantic, and this article talks basically about Christians in Hollywood. And it talks about you, and it says that you're part of the 70s show, and you said what you said already, a long-running sitcom that's literally about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Batali doesn't. I've been reading from the article. Batali doesn't need anyone to tell him he's living in Satan's vineyard. He's a prime example of the kind of compromises a Christian has to make when he becomes successful in Hollywood. And again, that's their words. I'm sure you might use the language differently. Reporters don't always get kind of what's going on. But here's what he says. He says, this back to you, it says, but he says with resignation, this is where God put me. And then it goes on to say, Batali, 41, could pass for a Midwestern pastor. He's friendly and clean-cut, tucks his shirt into his jeans, which, by the way, what's the point of that? His office is decorated with drawings by two kids with considerable Winnie the Pooh memorabilia. And then it says on the other side of the desk is a Bible, which he reads every day at work, a habit his fellow writers definitely think is weird. And I think it's kind of fascinating because clearly they're trying to figure you out and this audience. And by the way, the title of the article is Can Jesus Save Hollywood? We'll put it in the links as well. Okay, so I mean, think with me, like you're reading your Bible every day. You got it on your desk. You're obviously making a statement when you leave a Bible on the desk. You want people to ask a question. Like, how do your fellow writers who are writing for an aggressively secular audience, I mean, again, this is not touched by an angel.
Yeah.
So how do your fellow writers like think of you? Like what do they? How do they interact with you? Are they like? Do they not swear around you? Do they say, oh, Dean wouldn't like that? Or tell me a little bit that interaction.
Well, I'll share that, and then I want to get back to the word compromise just for a
Yeah,
second
yeah.
after this. But television writers' rooms, 10 to 15 people in a room, and it's impossible to be a closet at anything in Hollywood. So we talk about our lives and who we are. And so I would just casually say I was at church this weekend, or I was with my small group, and they'd be fascinated about that. I was told by one writer on that show, Dean, I'm so glad I know you because now I know that all Christians aren't freaks. And I said,
Mm,
well, you don't really know me that well. But and I was told by another person, you're such a dichotomy. And I said, what do you mean? Well, you're a Christian, but you're funny. So I'll argue that those are witnesses. That's acts of
yeah.
witnessing to these people who are not bad people. They're just people who don't fully understand who Jesus is. Um, yes, sometimes people would sort of say, "Oops, sorry, I swore in front of you," but that doesn't really bother me. But it would come up almost every day in the room, either on a story idea where I'd be sort of arguing for a different story. Oh, you just don't like this idea because you're a Christian, or you must love this story idea because you are a Christian. It was all good natured. You got to be good natured in this world to survive and to be amongst people who think what you believe is kind of silly. I mean, again, few people disparaged me, and they didn't dismiss me, and they didn't care if I was a Christian, if I could come up with the act break or the right joke for the moment. And that was my job. And that's
Mm,
where I go. That brings me back to compromise, because I don't think compromise is a bad word. I don't think, when at the end of the day Jesus asks us, did you compromise? Jesus is asking us, did you sin? And did you love me? And did you feed the hungry? And did you take care of my sheep? And so again, did Daniel compromise when he was serving in a kingdom that was doing things that were anathema to God? There's a section in Deuteronomy, I think, and I'm going to be paraphrasing it, but it says, when you enter the land the Lord gives you, don't have anything to do with the diviners and the sorcerers and the spiritists. These people are anathema to God. And yet, if you look in the second or third chapter of Daniel, it says that Daniel became chief amongst the spiriters and the diviners, and all these people that were doing these things that God had said were horrible. He put Daniel in charge of them. And so
mm,
I'm arguing, well, I will argue that when Daniel was in charge of those spiritists and diviners, the work that they were doing was less damaging to the kingdom of God than it was if somebody else had been in charge of them. Now, this is messy. And again, Daniel was a slave. I was not. But and Joseph the same. Like, Joseph has to participate in things that are ungodly and do the job for years and years and years, until then he's asked to interpret dreams and manage the famine and all those sorts of things. There was compromise that happened in those things. I just don't think there was sin. Daniel and his friends said, we're not going to be defiled by the food that the king is offering us. So I say to young writers, what is it that defiles you? Make sure that how you're living a life, that you're living a life that is less defiled than others, which is why I had that Bible on the desk, because I just needed
yeah.
something pure in my life at work that reminded me that there's something more pure than what we were doing. It's messy. I get it. It's not for everyone. I'm not comparing what I do to military at all, but God prepares us all a little bit differently. Some of us to be on the front lines, some to make the weapons, some to make the uniforms, some to drive the trucks. He puts some of us in places that are messy
Mm,
places to be. And gradually, I think, again, what's the alternative? If culture is so bad, if culture is so damaging, if culture is so anti-Christian, and you can make arguments that it is, and I can have conversations about that, but what's the alternative? Are we just going to abandon it? Because that's what we get, is an abandoned culture. Or are Christians going to go in there and be actively present and try to change things? And I'm just arguing that we abandoned it for kind of too long, and we made proclamations against Hollywood and made proclamations against the people of Hollywood. And what if we prayed for Hollywood instead? I'm part of an organization called the Hollywood Prayer Network. It's trying to get everyone in the church to pray for the people in Hollywood, to pray for the projects in Hollywood. And maybe that's what changes our culture, is by asking God to bring more people to look at Hollywood as something of a mission field, bring talented people there who are going to change
mhm.
what the culture looks like coming out of Hollywood. And by the way, if other Christians want to go and make content specifically for the church, that's fine too. We need worship music as much as we need music for radio or for theater or whatever. But I think that if the alternative is to just abandon it and let God destroy it, I always say that if Hollywood is Sodom and Gomorrah, he would have already destroyed it, because I can find at least 10 good people here who are trying to do God's will and advance His kingdom through our lives.
Yeah, I just preached at Reality LA and for Jeremy Treat, and lots of people engaging that concept. But it is messy. It is messy to try to figure this out, and I think that's a big part. We have one more segment left. We're going to get right to the calls, because we've been having this fascinating discussion with Dean Batali, and again talking about Lewis and Tolkien and his play at the Museum of the Bible right now. But we got one more one more segment. Let's get to the calls. 877-548-3675. When we come back, we're going to go to John. We're going to go to Brooke. We're going to keep going through and see who we can get to. Again, our phone number is 877-548-3675. You can talk about Hollywood. You can talk about how to engage the culture. You can talk about Lewis and Tolkien. Join us. Stay with us. 877-548-3675. Okay, we're back. Ed Stetzer Live. Brooke, John, Andrew, going to go to you, but let's think of this as a lightning round. Need you to get right to your question so we can hear from Dean. Brooke, you're up first. Go right ahead.
Okay. Hey, thank you. I'm listening on 89.3 FM in Pennsylvania. I've always appreciated the genre of writing, of playwriting in particular. And I just wonder, do you have some kind of a desire of creating like a vision or a thought of what the changes you want to create in your audience before you started writing the play, or did it evolve toward it, sort of toward the end, or and also what is it? What would it be?
Yeah, well, Brooke, look, let's get right to Dean so we give time to answer. Dean, go right ahead.
It's a great question. I didn't. The only intent I had was to put these two characters on the stage. And then as I discovered what they were saying, and they started talking about friendship, and I knew I wanted to get into Addison's Walk. So I did want to represent the argument that Tolkien made for faith. People say nobody's ever been argued into the kingdom of God. Well, Lewis was. I'm not expecting them to come to Jesus in this moment, because Lewis didn't come to Jesus in this moment. But I wanted to show two characters who were using their faith toward reconciliation and forgiveness. And so if anything, after I wrote it, I realized, wow, people are actually reconciling and forgiving each other after this, and going to their friends and telling them how much they love one another. It was very flattering. And so without realizing it, that became my intent. My intent was my first intent was don't be boring. My second intent was I'd like to see these two Christian characters resolve their differences. And now that I've written, I put it in front of people, and I'm really touched at how people are reconciling and forgiving and thinking deeply about their friendship. So I don't generally go into my writing with an agenda or a purpose. I think theme emerges. I think when you start with theme, you can end up with propaganda. Propaganda isn't always horrible. Sistine Chapel is propaganda, so is Handel's Messiah. But I tend to let theme emerge as it's writing. So if you put characters on stage who have a worldview that you like, that theme will eventually emerge, because they're right. That worldview will eventually emerge in a positive way.
No, and such fascinating characters as well, and love that you did it. Let's go to John in Indianapolis. John, you're live on the air. Go right ahead.
Hey, thank you very much for taking my call. I'm very impressed by the fact that you're going into enemy territory and you're scattering seed, and it's beginning to grow. Have you watched any of the Kendrick brother films?
Yeah.
Which have had tremendous success, and I would just say that we all should be encouraged by that.
Yeah, I have, and we talk about Hollywood here, and Hollywood isn't just a place. The Kendrick brothers are making their films in Georgia. There's a lot of independent movies happening, and there are a lot of Christians who have decided we're going to do it over here. We're going to kind of make our own lane. And the Kendrick brothers won't even call themselves filmmakers. They call themselves ministers, because they're both pastors. I appreciate some films that I'll put in the faith genre. I don't think faith should really be a genre. Faith is an audience more than a genre. And I appreciate the fact that they're telling stories about Christian characters. One of my struggles with a lot of Christian movies, and not specifically the Kendricks, but a lot of Christian movies all have these happy endings. And so I'll frequently say, I want to see stories about people who don't win football games and people who don't stand up out of their wheelchairs and people who don't get everything they pray for and love Jesus anyway, and people who utilize their faith in ways. And so a lot of Christian genres have to have this kind of happy ending, everything tied up in a bow, everybody's come to Jesus and everybody's healed, or suddenly proclaiming faith. And those stories happen. I'm not saying they don't happen. I would just like to see stories that are a little more messy and, like I say, show people who don't get everything they want and love God anyway. But I think it's a legitimate genre. It's opened Hollywood's eyes a little bit to this audience out there. And I just don't think a lot of non-Christians are going into Kendrick Brothers movies. And that's kind of one of my kind of complications with the Christian.
I remember at the end of the movie, I'm trying to remember because it made the news, that it was the movie, Denzel Washington, I think it's called Flight. And
yes.
At the end of the movie, there's actually a copy of the book from one of the, I forget which one it was, but one of the Kendrick Brothers films that was kind of tied into a book. So it was interesting. This, and I saw it on one of these Christian news sites, sort of explaining it. This crossover moment. What do you? I mean, right now there seems to be. I think Hollywood has discovered Christian. I don't know what the right word would be. Christian audiences,
Christian audiences.
We're seeing.
Yeah, a lot of conversations about that.
A lot of conversation, a bit of a vibe shift, people call it, and more. When you look out there on the landscape right now, what are some like products or programs that you say, man, these folks are really getting it right, coming from maybe a Christian perspective, but not just for Christians? Are there people who are getting it right that you say, those are the ones I'd go see?
I wish I had a faster answer.
Okay, no worries.
I'm going to say Martin Scorsese's work. He had a movie called Silence years ago, which not a lot of people saw. And he's actually producing a series right now called The Saints, which happens to be on Fox News app or something like that.
Yeah, we actually had, with Silence, we actually did the exhibit for that at the Billy Graham Center when I was there. Because it was, and it's one of those films you talk about that talks about people's faith, but it's not a happy ending sort of thing as well. Well, no worries. There might be others that come up. Let's try to get another call. Let's go to Andrew. Andrew down there in Florida. You're live on there. Go ahead with your question or your comment. You're live.
Yeah, real quick. I like the idea of the Bible on desk. I'm an oncologist, and I have one on my desk so my patients can ask questions about it. I think that's great where you are. My question is more for my son. He's a first-year college student, went to a Christian school his whole life. He was big into the arts and then transferred over to making movies, and now he seems to be falling away for it because he just doesn't think there's a place for a white boy to be making it in this world at this time. So how would I continue to encourage him to keep moving forward in that direction? Because I really think he's very talented, not only in acting and singing, but also his writing.
Yeah, and there's a crisis in young men, and we're seeing that as well. So, Andrew, super question. So let's help Andrew's son and kind of navigate some of this, your answer. But in general, let's keep talking about Christians in the arts. What would your exhortation be towards his son, and then more broadly?
Well, first of all, I don't use the term "it warms my heart" very often, but it warms my heart to hear a dad talking about his son who he wants to encourage to be a filmmaker. That's not things that were said 40 or 50 years ago amongst Christians very often. So that's a very good thing. There's a lot of resources out there right now. I encourage you to go to HollywoodPrayerNetwork.org or ActOneProgram.com. Those are organizations that I'm involved in and teach for. They have a lot of resources in terms of books, websites, podcasts that talk about Christians in Hollywood. If you search Christians in Hollywood and kind of find people like me and others who've done interviews like this that talk about what it takes to make it in Hollywood, how to prepare for Hollywood. You want to encourage people to make things, and talent will rise up. And if you have something to say and you're saying it well, what I've struggled with is we haven't really had a system in place in the Christian world where we have been able to get qualified people trained the right way. Our film schools are getting better. But I can count on one hand how many writers who have been in the WGA are now teaching at Christian schools. So we need more people who've done the work, worked in Hollywood, to then go teach whether it's Christian schools or other schools. So I just encourage people to find those resources, read those books, listen to those podcasts. You can do masterclass now and get hours of education from Ron Howard and Martin Scorsese and Aaron Sorkin about how to be a writer and how to be a filmmaker. We have to do that. We can't only be off in our little world. You have to go to the best people and really become a student of these things, because I'm kind of frustrated with, I'll say I'm frustrated with God. I'll say I'm confused that God hasn't fully equipped the body of Christ with these great, great artists. It's happening more with shows that are coming out now and things that are happening that Christians are making for mainstream content. And there's people out there that, you don't even know are Christians that are making stuff that's good. But we need to figure out ways to raise the quality of what we're doing. So if you can encourage your son to make stuff and to find people who know more than he does and learn and really work on developing the craft, that's where I think we're a little bit behind the ball in terms of preparing the next generation to really do this job really well. And also, by the way, we need more Christian executives in Hollywood. One of the problems I have is when I'm pitching shows that have Christian characters, most executives in Hollywood want to put on shows for people that they know, and they just don't know a lot of Christians. So when I say, hey, here's a show that's really going to appeal to the people that I go to church with, they're going, well, I'd rather do a show that's for the people who go to Hollywood parties, because then they tell me how cool I am.
Those people. Listen,
and
we've got about 30 seconds left. Do me a favor, invite people, tell us why we should come see Lewis and Tolkien in the last 30 seconds.
You will be mesmerized by these guys, these great writers who would not have been who they were without each other, and would not have been who they were without their faith. And they were writing as a result of their faith. Lewis more specifically, Tolkien more differently. But it's worth it to live with these guys. They have a lot to say. And you'll also see gospel truth on stage if that's what you want to see as well.
Love that. And such a great story these two have. So I'm excited to encourage people to go to the play. By the way, all these resources that Dean mentioned, go to edstetzerlive.com. It's all linked right there. So let me thank my guest, Dean Vitale, for joining me. Thanks to our team at Moody Radio, Karen Hendren, Merle St. James, Lisa Gently, and Cheyenne Man in the Phones. To hear today's program again, go to edstetzerlive.com, or you can subscribe there as a podcast as well. Ed Stetzer Live is a production of Moody Radio.